welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning back in to A Guide to the Black Madonna, where me and my colleague Martin here are dissecting this fantastic campaign from the 90s and establish it in a Cult Divinity Lost reinterpretation way that helps you run it a bit more smoothly. As I said, my name is David, and this is my co-host Martin. You find me usually on the Illusion Horror and Con Discord server. I'm one of the administrators there. And if you have not yet heard, we have a con coming up, December 5th to 7th. GM registration is still open, hopefully when this video comes out. Otherwise, player registration will be opening soon, and all the information can be found on the illusionhorrorcon.events. And Martin, what about you?
What about me? I'm a Cult Divinity Lost enthusiast and horror gamer in general. I can also be found most of the time at the Illusion Horror Con server and certainly at the convention. Maybe if you want to play with me, the convention is a good place to do that. If you want to potentially run a game that I can play in, the convention is also a good place to do that, I suppose.
Fantastic. And yet you have submitted quite a number of games to choose from, so if you haven't, check it out, all the information again on the website. We both are running the Black Madonna in various different sessions. Martin is relatively at the beginning, while I'm a bit further along by now. And one of the things that we noticed during running this is, I think, that we both asked each other questions and we wanted answers to, and I think that's where we kind of created this podcast too. So this is the last point for any public players. If you want to play this campaign, stop watching now, because anything beyond this will spoil you and will teach you about stuff that you cannot take back and will ruin your experience with Cult Divinity Lost Black Madonna. And yeah, Martin.
Yes, and our goal with this series is to support game masters who want to run the Black Madonna in Cult Divinity Lost, which is a system that's far more narrative driven than the original 90s Cult, which leaned more heavily into combat. And we will talk about how to adapt the campaign, what challenges to expect, and how to bring horror, history, and metaphysics to your table.
Fantastic. But before we go any further, we want to stress very clearly that the Black Madonna is a very dark campaign. It contains mature themes and trauma, harm to children, war, abuse, death, religious imagery, gore, body horror. It's a classic cult campaign. A lot of the spoilers and content warnings that we discuss here, we hopefully make clear from the beginning, but we want to advise to viewer discretion. So if there's some subjects that you find too graphic or you don't want to listen to yourself, just stop listening. It is a very graphic and might be triggering campaign, so be considerate about your own mind and safety. So feel free to skip if it's something that you don't want to listen to.
And we also want to make this clear that this podcast is a fan project, so we are not officially affiliated with Helmgast, the publishers of Cult Divinity Lost, or the original authors of Cult. We are simply sharing our own experiences, interpretations, and advice for running the Black Madonna in Cult Divinity Lost.
Fantastic. Last time we talked a bit about everything. We went over various points and tidbits, and we found that it's already a great support by the community, so thank you for sharing your support. But this time we want to start actually explaining a bit more in detail. And where do you start? Obviously at the end of the book? No, at the beginning, with the background story. And Martin was so generous to look into that background a bit more detailed. The story begins in World War II, but I think it leans a bit further and goes over various things, as we mentioned probably in our first episode. What's the general outline that we have to envision here in that campaign book?
Yeah, so we start out with Leningrad 1941, which is really the GM's private backstory chapter, I guess. All of the information there is going to be important. It's the crucial backstory, but it's before the players enter the picture. And after that, the overall structure of the Black Madonna is going to be a 6-chapter story. We go from Leningrad 1941, then we arrive in Germany in 1991 with our players.
The killer stands.
Jump. Yes.
Yeah.
That's
where I think the infection begins, and the hook and the drawing of the players begins.
Yes. We get into this this quite complicated story that we're with a lot of urgency suddenly hitting our player characters from every direction. Then second in the outline is Shadows from the Past, which is a somewhat shorter chapter with a bit of where a bit of the backstory sort of starts to unfold, and we're really setting up for the dark dreams that come after. And we also set up the big conflict, I guess, between the two higher powers, between Chagitiel and Bina.
Exactly.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's pretty much I feel the players will really quickly learn the urgency of having to act, the need for travel, the problems with events and their names being known. I think that's what one can say about this.
And then we dive, well, not necessarily then, because as we will return to in a second, this does not at all necessarily happen sequentially. But in the third chapter, we dive deep into the dream world. The part that reveals, I guess, one of the big devices that the Black Madonna uses to access this backstory, the 1940s and what happened between then and the 1990s, i.e. these dreams, and the dream inferno, which I'm sure we're gonna spend a lot of time on at some point.
Plus, the players kind of actually learn how to dream properly. They get a lot of lore, magic, various ideas and concepts that, I think it already start to explore then the richness of this campaign that goes a bit beyond like any standard kind of scenario, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean that is where you get the big custom move if you are into custom moves, namely the art of dreaming. So that's something to look forward to.
Exactly. I think that is followed up with the German Autumn, which technically, as also mentioned in the book, is not necessarily played after that, but can be played simultaneously. It just depends on the handling, and a few of those tips we'll kind of touch on today as well, and obviously in the further episodes as we go through this. And then, Mother Russia Calls, where we kind of venture deeper into conspiracies, international plots, and, military actions. There's no other way to say this. And just when players think that all is done, we go to hell and back, with hopefully a grand conclusion for your players.
Yeah, and so why are we discussing this not in the order that it's written in the book?
That is a good question. Because I think primarily that's not really how often games run. And especially if you want to immerse your players directly with this campaign, certain elements should be set up way ahead of the time that the chapter even begins. And there are a few things in the book that may kind of guide or railroad players into doing certain actions, which can feel uncomfortable for some. So it also creates a bit of a background for you as a player, as a GM, to kind of establish a bit more rails that players can go down to, explore different things at the same time, and allow also a bit of it sounds stressful, but to do more things in the beginning, but it will make things easier along the way as the players learn with you things developing. And I think that is one of the primary reasons why it's a bit important to kind of use these chapters as they are written as an idea, as an inspiration, but definitely think about like what story do you want to focus on? Do you want to have a higher focus on X, Y, and Z because you have more expertise in this? Do you want to go more into dreaming? You reduce the other sections a bit. Not all of these have to be played 100% of the time. There are certain elements that you can incorporate, that you can take out. And I think, yeah, that's what I wanted to say to this. But Martin, what about you?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree, and I would add that I guess in every cult game, no plan really survives contact with the players for that long, and that's to some extent true about all role-playing games, like that. Both the player element and the dice element like challenges any idea to that you could sort of pre-plan things too much, which is good, right? We don't want to just set up a linear sequence of events and like walk ourselves through it, because that's fundamentally not as fun. I would say, especially with the Divinity Lost and this family of Powered by the Apocalypse and related games, the way the engine works, the way moves are set up, the way GM moves are set up, the players and the situations that they put themselves in have a lot of power to blow everything up and change the order of things and create unexpected outcomes, which is delicious, but also puts a bit of a burden on our shoulders if we want to be prepared for that. So that's what we're going to try to do, I guess. We're going to try to prepare ourselves.
And I think that actually reminds me of something, because that is something I encountered at my session 37 this week, which is that if you play it for longer because you enjoy the narrative that your characters develop, they will advance at some point. They will become stronger and stronger. And I feel like that's where the structure of how it's written is not really set out for Divinity Lost in this narrative way of becoming enlightened, becoming powerful, and becoming so strong that certain of the encounters basically become almost meaningless because your characters will have advanced too much, and you want to create some other kind of conflict rather than to have them go through like dungeon crawls over and over and over again. You want to focus the attention on the narrative and what is actually interesting about why do they need to enter this building and what are other options that they could explore. I think that's primarily what, at least for myself, also now understanding after running it for quite some time, has becoming clear that in future runs, these are things that I definitely want to look out for.
I think you made the point that you can kind of pick and choose a little bit what elements you want to focus on, and you probably absolutely have to do that because there is so much in there. Also, of course, ask your players what kind of stuff do they like. Do they like a lot of air raids or air base raids, or do they like a lot of character development?
Exactly.
And hopefully they will answer the latter, I guess. I for example, with the group I'm running for now, I do not see us using all the combat-focused material in the latter part. I think some of that will simply have to end up on the cutting room floor.
Yep.
But that is perfectly okay because there is so much
Absolutely.
good stuff to choose from anyway. So we will have things to do.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think with that, we're heading back to the beginning.
Yes.
Leningrad, 1941.
Leningrad,
Martin,
1941.
tell me about what is happening in the backstory
Yes.
for the GMs.
Yes. And in Leningrad, 1941, the siege of Leningrad, some quite awful in every imaginable way possible things happened in real life history. Leningrad was besieged, and for almost 900 days, it's a military blockade that was by the Axis powers. It was Germany and Finland, mostly Germany, but also the Finnish army from one side that led siege, was part of the Eastern Front of World War II, and it lasted for almost 900 days, so from 1941 to 1944. And Leningrad was at the time, it's now St. Petersburg, of course. When the campaign starts, it's also St. Petersburg. Huge, second largest city in Soviet, 3.5 or so million people. And after all the death and starvation, about 1.5 million people, I think is the estimate, perished.
Even less, yeah.
So,
even more perished, so even less survived at the end. Yeah.
Yes. So more than, and it is.
A bit of loss of words.
Loss of words. Yes, and I mean today, of course, there is always a lot of political debate about what words you put on things, right? And at the time, the laws of war were not sort of as established as the international community was not really not formalized these things as they do today. But if we look at the policy, it was definitely starvation by strategy, right? This was the idea that, particularly if you look at the German leadership and what Hitler thought about it at the time, quite obviously a genocidal aim. This it's like to make the civilians suffer simply, and the civilians suffered quite a lot.
Yep.
And that is why this moment in history was chosen by the authors of the Black Madonna. I suppose they picked this as a pivotal moment when hell quite literally appears on Earth in the cult's metaphorical interpretation of things. So what happens here during the siege is that we start with the Kalenko family. It's a family that's moved to St. Petersburg, Leningrad. They've lived there for quite some time, but they come from Ukraine originally. And they have fared relatively well during the Soviet times, despite the fact that they are originally an aristocratic family, and they have been able to keep some of their wealth and some of their influence, partly thanks to the Black Bible that the current patriarch of the family has inherited from father to son a really long time. It's written in some language that they don't really understand, because it is a language spoken in Inferno.
Mm-hmm.
And it is an artifact of Chagidiel, the death angel of abuse. So the Kalenko family is worshipping, without really understanding what they're doing, this death angel, and we're using this Black Bible through a sacrificial ritual to be able to sort of get help from down below, I guess, in trying times. And in this trying time, when there is cold and starvation and bombing all around them, Kalenko again turns to the Black Bible and sacrifices. He asks for help from Shagidiel, and help comes in the form of a man named Pogodin.
Exactly.
Pogodin is a name that we will see later in the campaign, but this is not the same Pogodin. This is the original one. And the way the book phrases it is that something like, because of the situation, it is not just any representative of Shagidiel that shows up. It is actually an incarnate of Shagidiel. Mm-hmm. We tried here a little bit before to wrap our heads around what is an incarnate really in the cult mythology or the cult cosmology. And I guess we settled on it's an avatar or representation of one of the higher powers.
Maintaining kind of the aspects and the parts of that Archon or Death Angel, basically, yeah. Because the lore in itself, I think, is a bit vague on a description, or at least the campaign book is a bit vague on a description what the incarnates are, and we might come to it later as well when it comes about role-playing these incarnates and how to portray them. But in principle, incarnates possess part of the higher power's identity in one form or another, and since Shagidiel has the abuse and the corruption aspect, this Pogodin that appears is well settled for the right place and time to work on his master's behalf.
Yes, and so Pogodin, he really takes over the Kalenko household, and he turns out to be both abusive and a corrupting influence. Sort of shoves Kalenko himself to the side, starts a series of sacrifices and rituals to infiltrate himself into leadership in Leningrad, occupied Leningrad, such as it is. Two other incarnates quickly follow, Garudin and Ignatiev, who are supposedly lesser demons here. Part of the incarnate idea is that any higher power can have any number of incarnates. They don't even necessarily need to be humans, can take different shapes. So Shagidiel can be in many places at once. Also, the Pogodin's plans involve the sacrifice of 3 members of the Kalenko family, the mother and the 2 daughters, sequentially. And the way this is written in a relatively dry narrative style, not being very emotional about it, it is quite chilling to read the description of the corruption and destruction of Kalenko's life, and that will also, and the Kalenko family's life, and that will return when we meet Kalenko and when we meet the daughters and the wife, Alyona, Katya, and Yelena again, because Alyona, Katya, and Yelena, they are turned into Nephirites, who are servants of Shagidiel, who look quite hideous and who are very conflicted about their servitude to this higher power. That is, they're
forced servitude, I would say.
Yes, and they are a type of tragic. Seriously tragic monsters, if you will, that will show up in the campaign repeatedly.
Exactly.
That was one side of this this cosmic conflict that takes place during the siege. The other side is she is later introduced by Chesenko, the Archangel of Russia, or the Black Madonna herself, the Archon Bina, who is the Archon of Community. That sounds very nice. We might return to it. It's not necessarily a good thing in the cosmic order of Kult, but it is certainly in Bina's interest that Chagidiel does not successfully bring hell onto Earth in Leningrad. And through various machinations, Bina manages to establish herself in a few people who are still inside the occupied city, or close to it at least. A priest, Ivan Chesenko, who is, after being beaten close to death, is brought back as a lictor, one of these creatures that represent the Archons on Earth in Elysium, and that are the jailers of humanity. They are described. They are the people who try to keep the illusion running and avoid the status quo being broken too much.
Exactly. And obviously it's much more powerful than anything human or humanesque form would suggest.
They are truly one of the Nepharites, previous, and lictors are probably the iconic monstrous creatures in some way in Kult, and they are both very tragic in some way, something we might also return to. But Ivan Chesenko, he manages a cathedral, black cathedral, that is falling apart, and he is the last priest there, really.
Yep.
The last one keeping the lights on in these dark times. We also have the icon painter Dimi Nesterov, who is going to be the prophet, in a way, of the incarnation of Bina. And with this ragtag team of a priest, an icon painter, and a little girl. Yes.
Exactly.
Who is the little girl, David?
Just a nobody, a almost dying little girl on the side of the street that I think Dmitry Nesterov picks up on his way home and deliberates to take her ration card for food, but then decides to not do it, and he takes her instead to an orphanage that has been now established in the city. What he doesn't know, it's Kalenko's orphanage, the source of all evil, but then again, he's not privy to these higher power games that are happening in the background there. And what I think then is kind of the beginning is this battle between Bina, a sneaking Archon that tries to infiltrate and destroy Chagdigel's plan of raw power and destruction by the gentle manipulation and orchestration of various little puzzle pieces that fall into her place that allow her to defeat Chagdigel, or at least so she thinks.
Yes. So Magda is taken to the orphanage, where, of course, all kinds of horrible abuse are happening in a way orchestrated by Pogodin. And after suffering there for some time, Chesenko and Nesterov managed to get her out of there again, and through a process that involves some beautiful symbols, the painting of an icon with Magda's face and a statue of the Black Madonna in the cathedral's basement, Bina manages to break through into the illusion and into the girl, and Magda becomes another incarnate, or at least a vessel for an incarnate, and she becomes the champion, I suppose, of Bina
The chosen champion,
in this symbolic fight that takes place inside Kalenko's palace. And I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you, what do you make out of the events here? Because when we read this, it is described rather abstractly in the text. To what extent is this fight a physical fight between two beings, and to what extent is it entirely a metaphorical description?
That's a damn fine question, my dear friend. I mean, for one, you have to, I think, consider the practicality here. Chigdigiel uses the suffering and pain, and pretty much he relies upon the Siege of Leningrad to strengthen his power. He uses his other incarnates to infiltrate the Russian high command and military and city ordnance to kind of control the city, basically making everybody do whatever he wants to, which follows with, various awful things happening, from cannibalism, torture, and so on. And then you have, Bina as a disruptor to his element, and given the lost hope and the pain and suffering that must have been in that city, it is understandable that they in a sense there is a bit of community, but like when you see how then Kalenko's incarnates that he brought into this world are now corrupting everything. The moment I think Magda turns up at his orphanage and is kind of the vessel for Bina, I feel like, even for myself, I keep it kind of as a blank screen. Like, she comes inside, she glows, and then something happens in the house. And I love that imagery that I feel like you don't really need to describe. You just can understand that the battle between them, because later on in the campaign, to hell and back, we will see firsthand a bit of what one visualization of that battle could look like. But just in the intro, as a backbone of when you read this campaign the first time, I think that this shortness of something happens, and I think it's like Nesterov and Chizenko are instructed to make sure nobody leaves the place. Everybody needs to maintain in there for Bina to succeed. And then you have it again, the flaw of humanity. Nesterov sees a group of children, and he can't help himself. He needs to free them. He needs to let them go because he doesn't want to see them to die. And it's such a beautiful kind of illustration just from the get-go for a GM to have a picture in mind. This is what happened back then. This is what created the main antagonist for the campaign, or the connection for the players. And it also establishes kind of the mindset of the larger enemies here at play. That all the players do, all you as a GM do, is basically just facilitate the chessboard upon which these two massive deities fight. It's a battle that you're not supposed to understand how it even works. It is something that we are not privy to. We don't even dare to understand any of it. That is my interpretation, I think.
And it's precisely why I asked, because at the end, in the last chapter, if our player characters reach there, and don't end up somewhere else entirely, we will be faced with bringing this the second round, I suppose, of this conflict to the table. But we will get there in time. And yes, Nestorov performs has the crucial flaw of being human and showing empathy, which of course we hope later when the player characters are faced with the same choice, they will also show. So he rescues some of the children, lets them out of this building before it is swallowed up by the ground and completely disappears from almost everyone's memory. And in doing so, he rescues 3 little boys. Philip, Sasha, and Anatoly, later Anton, that we will hear a lot about in this campaign, because they harbor inside of them the 3 incarnates, Pogodin, Garudin, and Ignatiev, if that is indeed really their names. These shards of Chagidiel's essence that hides in these children, and Binah cannot see them, cannot find where the incarnates are hidden.
Especially
so they slip
believing
out.
that she destroyed everything within the cathedral as it disappears. Yeah.
And these children, they grow up to become Philip Kramer, Sasha Godin, taking the name from Pogodin himself, because the boy does not know his name, and Anatoly, later Anton Mahler. And these are the three Russians, as they are referred to, that will form the main antagonists for the beginning of the campaign. Well, still they are just boys, and together with Magda and the other children that were rescued from the orphanage, they go through a further series of
torment and
yes,
horrible events.
Moving from a camp S-17 outside of Leningrad, then to a clinic in Moscow. They are obviously traumatized by what they've been through, to the point where some of these children start to physically mutate and showing all these spikes coming out of them, and they become quite scary to look at. And then from Moscow to a clinic in Eastern Germany, in Frankfurt an der Oder, where they are moved by Dr. Tatilina, who we will meet later, who is a psychologist who, I guess, has some somewhat more progressive ideas on how to deal with children who are traumatized by war. And they actually do get better to some extent, and they grow up together, Philip, Sasha, and Anton. Of course, as adults, their lives become quite problematic in different ways, and Philip becomes a death magician. Sasha, a leader in organized crime, and Anton Mahler, high-ranking in the Stasi in East Germany, where he seems to take the opportunity to commit quite some abuse on prisoners and so on. And throughout their lives, these 3 men seem to act out a bit of Chagidiel's principle, abuse. And it is open to interpretation, I think, whether to what extent there is anything really supernatural about this. To what extent this is the incarnates acting, or to what extent these are the people, Philip, Sasha,
Psychological
and Anatoly,
results
acting.
of the yes. stress and the torture they went through themselves, yeah.
And I guess the secret with at least a metaphorical interpretation of Kult Divinity Lost is that it is both, or saying these things are the same thing. We're not inventing monsters to try to explain away human evil. We are inventing monsters to represent human evil in some sense. At least that's my take on it. I know this is certainly a matter of interpretation.
Yeah.
So they are also drawn to Magda, right? We need to talk a little bit about Magda as an adult or growing up, because Magda is going to be incredibly important.
Exactly. Nicely put. So then I think the story of Magda begins in 58 when she kind of finally leaves the mental hospital and begins to establish her own life. It takes a few years to kind of maintain a bit of idea of how to live outside of a mental hospital, and I think she uses that at moment still the closeness and the connection to her three friends that she made throughout her time in the hospital, Anton, Sasha, and Philip. And so those three are kind of sticking together while she establishes a bookstore for Slavic literature, and they maintain good friends. Shortly after, Magda also begins a relationship with Philip, and they kind of, I think that's when, theoretically, again, humans, law and metaphysics all crumble together, because as one could expect, the repercussions of their childhood kind of catches up with them, and Philip becomes abusive. He's a drinker or alcoholic, and he kind of spirals Magda into that cycle as well. They become quite destructive. They do have a moment of kind of before that they establish what they call the Slavic Association, a organization to help incorporate people from the East into German society. I think that's their original idea, to help them come in and understand how things work, give them a bit of guidance. But yeah, Magda is not really able to kind of fully commit herself for too long with this, as she then, in this destructive cycle with Philip, at some point loses her mind. I mean, everybody could understand that, but she loses her mind by a simple accident when Philip, in a drunken state, opens a portal to Inferno in the apartment that they live in, which I actually have used in my campaign as a background notice when they kind of did some background research onto Magda to kind of figure out what happened and these strange events of a whole block exploded, supposed gas leak and so forth. But like, that's the first time that they see the connection between Philip Kramer and Magda Orlova. Even not fully mentioned, but it is kind of you can read it through the lines. And it allows you to kind of add a bit from the backstory there. Yeah. And once Magda in mid-60s is then released from the hospital, she distances herself from her three friends. She meets Lev Orlov, a nice and normal assuming person who owns a bookstore. They get married and they kind of move in together and try to begin a family, a normal life. However, Philip Kramer doesn't really like that. He becomes this obsessive stalker and manipulator to basically try to break them up and try to reunite with Magda. And I think it's a tragic life cycle, and he becomes obsessive, and a few years later, when he potentially learns more about magic rituals and his powers that he might have that he doesn't really fully understand probably at that time either. Um, the first really the first really strange thing happens is it's hard to say what is not strange about all of this, but Lev Orlov, Magda's husband, dies under mysterious circumstances by black boils, and he is basically found dead, and Magda goes into a frantic and is committed again to a hospital. Um, she is discharged. Several years later, in the 70s, she then completely tries to block everyone from her old past, and she becomes an uh, active writer and begins her writing career. Um, and then she becomes a threat slowly, or the slower. And then she slowly becomes an issue for the three, because she's starting to write about the rise of neo-Nazism in the East Germany. She kind of is still seen by her former friends as an issue, and luckily by then Anton is a high-ranking Stasi official, and he arranges for Magda to be incarcerated for political threats to national security or some reason. And their intention is to kill Magda in prison. However, that doesn't go really well, and for some reason she is able to escape that. Did she have a guardian angel, or did something else have a different play here? Once she's released, she then in 78 becomes opens an antique bookstore in West Berlin. And I think that's when most of the players will probably start to establish connections and build something of a relationship with Magda. And later on, she kind of moves between Berlin and Hamburg, back and forth. But at least from a general perspective, it sounds like she is having a normal life up to just a year after the reunification of Germany, 90s, when Philip tries to re-engage kind of a relationship with her, and the the three boys and her become friends again, or do they? Well, it's a hard thing. I think it's a trauma processing event that happens for them, and that's when we are where we are in the early 90s, and that's the state that Magda is in. Um, but I think we come a bit further to that as well. But Martin, anything to add to
Yeah.
that Magda Orlova?
Yes. By the way, I love the heading of this part of the background, which is Four Destinies. And it's told in these relatively succinct bullet points that contain so much stuff that probably never comes up in most campaigns, except maybe in some backstory event, like you investigate and find out, oh, there was a fire, or oh. But we really see this problematic on and off relationship between the three men that harbor the incarnate and the woman who was the incarnate of Binna. It seems like they are drawn together and pulled apart, and in these sort of very vicious cycles over their lives. And there is a tragedy here that probably doesn't play out so much in every actual campaign, but as part of the tragedy is that people do these things, right? There are absolutely relationships that are not necessarily good for us. Hopefully, on a slightly smaller scale for most of us than Magda and Philip have suffered through, but that still might. The people might return to whether it's good for them or not. And sometimes maybe it is good for them. But in this case, certainly not. You see Magda even rejoining the Slavic association that has grown to become something different entirely, and ending up on the board, with where she was initially. She was part of founding it, but now it turns out that she's pulled back into something different and much scarier than it was when she left off. But should we perhaps round out this backstory by talking a bit about how we bring this into the campaign as much as possible? Because let me just give my. I had a lovely time reading this several times, both in Swedish and in English, and it is very similar in the original in English. But it is, to me, a little bit tragic that a lot of this stuff probably does not come out in play so much. Of course, we do other great things in play, but I really want to find ways to sprinkle little parts of the backstory in as foreshadowing for the last chapter, and also maybe to deepen the Magda Orlova character a bit, because I personally think that's one of my favorite NPCs. So there are some ways that this comes up naturally in the campaign. There are the dream chapters later, where we, through another of the children that we haven't even introduced yet, we revisit some of these locations in a dream guise, and we go to Kalenko's orphanage in the dream. We might meet Kalenko in the dream. So that is already there. And the last chapter, of course, is an echo of the events in the Leningrad 1941 chapter. But you already mentioned some parts where you had used the backstory in other ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are specific points throughout the campaign later on when, for example, the players will face a quite infuriated Ivan Chesenko, who will state his point of view and his state of mind to them very clearly. And during that time, that is one of the first points where I think officially you can introduce a bit more from the backstory that you couldn't find in records or something like that. But obviously it's heavily skewed because Ivan Chesenko is, he has one side of view and he has one intention because he works for Bina. You also have at some point relatively early the encounter with the three Nephirites for the first time. And they will reappear, as we said earlier, several times. All of these are great positions to kind of introduce parts of the backstory. Obviously, all of these parts will be skewed and be objective from the perspective of the person that will narrate them. But as you said, Martin, I also find it's a waste of a lot of pages in the book if you don't bring this to the players and just ask them to read it later. And one of the options that I've chosen is, yes, I kind of look through the bullet lists when they do the first research, when they investigate the NPCs or the antagonists. Can I bring up some information in some form? But that works great for anything after the war and after Leningrad. But there are other aspects that you cannot transport otherwise. But, for example, if your character gets broken, you have a beautiful option there that states you can shift the character in space and time. And you can utilize that as a moment when they suddenly end up somewhere in Leningrad and they see kind of the war-torn city that is beside when they go through it in their dreams. These can be different and should be different interpretations of it, because one might be realer than the other or more related to it. You have other options again when the characters break or when they advance to kind of get a glimpse of the truth, to understand really what happens. They get a vision or something like that. I do have to say it is much more difficult to incorporate the true old backstory into it, even when talking to Jazenko or Dmitry Nesterov or something later on. It is good, but it's not. It is always skewed, and you know it when you narrate it because it's not what happened, and you want to try to transpose it. So for the later stages, there are plenty of opportunities to kind of bring this in. To also focus. I just recently had a character break, again, and I chose the moment to shift the character in space and time. Actually, specifically to the moment of Philip Kramer casting the spell to kill Lev Orlov. A beautiful scene where he comes home kind of angry, tears apart the picture of Magda and Lev, and begins a ritual for the first time that kind of, I wanted to showcase his beginning of like becoming this antagonist that they see, they think that he is the bad guy for all intents and purposes. He's the most evil and cruel person. But he has that moment of like, just he's lovesick. He is in love with a woman that has ignored him now. And yeah, using elements of the Four Destinies and the other backstory is very rewarding, but it's very hard to incorporate. What are your options, Martin? What are you thinking of?
The shifting in time and space, that's the great. I mean, it's also a very cult-y solution.
Yeah.
I like that. I used another culty element to get a little bit of foreshadowing, I suppose, into the very early parts of the campaign. In the Killer's Dance, the first chapter, one of the first things that happen after the infection is that the player characters have these nightmares. And the nightmares as written have these recurring features of something moving in the dark and getting closer, and it's cold and you're underground and you're in pain. And what I did was that for player characters, I mixed these dream elements with parts of their backstory and the dark secrets, and I also sprinkled in a few rather disjointed scenes from the Leningrad chapter, which of course made the dream sequence quite long. It took up most of a session, but that's fine. I like the surreal stuff, and I suppose if you're not up for the surreal part of Cult, this is the wrong campaign to be playing. Yes. So I took little scenes like Kalenko opening the Black Bible, the character seeing this language they don't understand, the blood on the pages, and a little element of young Magda in the basement of the cathedral in front of the Black Madonna statue, and a few names that will return later. Magda said something about Kalenko and the priest, not naming him, but saying that she had a mission or a task, that kind of thing, and then quickly cut. So small pieces of dream mixes in there that I'm sure the players have mostly forgotten about, but hopefully some of them will pop up, or they might click furiously back in their notes once we get to talk about Kalenko again, or once a priest enters the narrative, and so on. So little pieces like that.
That actually reminds me, because one of the things that I've used, and I forgot about it because I made it so subtle. Philip Kramer is also a painter, and he draws, he paints. And so I've used his art occasionally in various of the locations to kind of depict part-time war efforts, an overlay of various scenes, maybe like an apartment or a half picture of a young Magda with a war-torn and, you know, destroyed Leningrad in the background, and he gives it weird names, and there may be sometimes plaques with like inscriptions about them that might or might not be from him. But I also added a bit every time uh, towards the level of the painting. So as my players were just in the Mother Russia chapter and they infiltrated a Air Force base, assuming that one of the incarnates was there. Uh, they were slightly disappointed, but behind one of the antagonists in that base, they saw a massive mural that was painted by Philip Kramer. And so, like, I could add again a bit of backstory there and establish a connection that they kind of could hangle up on. Uh, it is pretty hard to follow along, but there are a few elements that you can utilize. And yeah, I mean, sometimes they pop up when you have an idea, or the players give you a great inspiration. But yeah, certainly getting the characters broken gives you as a GM often a good amount of moves, but also like as you said, the dream sequences, the surrealism about this, the nightmares they suffer. That's a great point to kind of bring in this, because not only obviously have we Chigdigiel in Elysium to kind of influence his presence through the incarnates, but I mean, he must be there in dream worlds too, because his incarnates kind of also sleep. So he will rage upon destruction. And so as the campaign went on and some of the players still kind of suffer nightmares, I have them sometimes just have this awkward mix of standing in their most precious and homey place, but then outside of the window, just war and destruction, streets of Leningrad and everything kind of mixed together, basically. And Shagdigiel, as Sauron's eye, is kind of looking for them, trying to find their aura, trying to find the presence of them, as he has marked them, and he knows they're there, and he needs to know what they do. They need to not to interrupt his later plan. They are done. They need to be dealt with now. And so I think these elements are really interesting to utilize.
And using art is also a very culty thing to do. And there are some descriptions of like Kramer's artworks in the campaign already. So it sounds like a great idea to put more of them in there. I like that.
Yes.
I also used some of Magda's art, or accidental kind of. But when they open up, if the player characters open up Magda's computer in her Berlin apartment, it says that a lot of it among her drafts and finalized versions of articles she's written, she also has an angsty novel that takes place in 1930s Russia. And of course, one player character decided to read parts of this novel, or print it off and read it. And I thought, oh my, I'm gonna have to write Magda's novel. Oh no. But it turns out there is a part of flavor fiction in the beginning of the Leningrad 1941 chapter, just a little piece, this moment where Magda is found and brought to the orphanage, like you described, where the man who is narrating is considering whether to just leave her and take her ration card or what he's going to do with her. So I took that and put it as an excerpt of Magda's novel and gave it to the players. I did change the names though, so it wasn't Magda, it was Marsha, and it wasn't Kalenko's orphanage, it was some other name. But it's enough for the players to, of course, make the connection that this might be autobiographical in some conscious or subconscious way, which of course it is. That was maybe a little bit ham-fisted, but I enjoyed it, and it saved me from having to write parts of a novel about Soviet in the 1930s.
That reminds me, actually, actually also a very good point, and I think I used that as well. It's been quite a while now. But in the clinic in Frankfurt an der Oder, where if they make their right moves, they can go through the archives to kind of look into a bit more of Dr. Svetlina's earlier notes and records. There's a good moment to introduce basically short narrative excerpts of interviews with her and children describing the situation, talking about the man and the shadows, or something creeping. And I think I expanded actually quite a bit on that. And if you want, given the state that the hospital is in there, if you have some moves left, or one of the players, for example, has a drug addiction, utilize that to get them in a state where you can let them roll for see through the illusion, or just depending on how they feel in general, and just have them have the vision of like this coming to life in a scene unfolding in front of them. It makes it so much more horrific, especially at that point in time where they are, what is happening around them, and what they've seen so far. That can be a great point, and that is one of the few elements that you can narratively easily explain why they would find that information there.
Neat.
Yeah.
I do confess this is one of my favorite parts of Kult storytelling, that it doesn't always have to make sense, and you are allowed to break continuity and so on.
That is correct. And I think with this and how to bring these dream chapters into the campaign, I think let's just make a final transition here. As in the early 1990s, so a year before the campaign begins, Sasha, Anton, and Philip begin to have nightmares. They're going to have nightmares about your player characters. And they're going to have these nightmares where the player characters torture them, follow them, and basically do anything to them, but having them sleep properly through the night, which brings up their kind of paranoia about them when they first meet them back then in depending on how you run it, the opening scene of the campaign. And this can be already something that, if you have recent or often interaction with Magda as a connection from the players, maybe one of the 3 is accidentally there or already begins to suspect and see them. There's a whole section in the book as well about the player characters in the campaign, giving you detailed ideas about dark secrets, family ties, occupations that kind of bring this a bit in, that you can utilize if you want to kind of make this a bit more sticking. Like also, if your player character was a former Stasi officer, did he have maybe worked under Anton Mahler? Did he went to press conferences with him? It is a bit it's a bit much to think about this at the beginning of the campaign, but I think it is something that is laying the footpath for you to kind of have it a bit smoother down the road. And I hope you don't run this campaign just like, oh yeah, it sounds cool, I'm just going to read it out as it's written and run it like this. Think about what story you want to tell, and I think that's the important part here.
Should we talk about the German autumn?
Should we talk about the German autumn? That is
move on to the other key piece of the backstory here.
that is true. Yeah, so coming to the German Autumn, which is chapter 4, as far as I remember officially. Um, but it involves a lot of other things. First of all, something I learned today. Martin, what does the German Autumn for you mean before you even had any connections?
Yes, so the title of the chapter is probably two references at the same time. It's my guess. We might have to ask the authors if we ever have the opportunity. Uh, but the thing that it brought to mind for me as a Swedish reader is the book Tysk German Autumn by Stig Dagerman, who was a Swedish poet and journalist who wrote a series of articles about the post-World War II, post-Nazi Germany, where he interviewed a bunch of different people and told different stories from what it was like during the Second World War in Germany. But of course, it is also the German autumn of 1977, right?
Exactly. The Deutsche Herbst, where the Red Army fraction of Germany has rained their terror upon Germany, which is, if you consider the context in the book, where it concerns the rise of neo-Nazism, maybe a side reference, because obviously the RAF were kind of the leftmost extremist in a sense that tried to fight the whole system. But the main point about the German autumn here is um, the consideration that this doesn't just happen at chapter 4 or at chapter 2 or at chapter 3. No, this happened, this is happening while the characters grow up. This is in parallel to everything, if you want to portray it right and make it a bit easier on yourself as well. Um, because there you have a significant part of issues that kind of transpire in German society, as you have the East Germany basically being occupied by Soviet reign, still under that kind of reign, and people, well, maybe secretly are are torn by the ideas of what they follow and how to cope with that, how to develop anything further. And in Germany, obviously, one of the big question is also for for characters and players being born after the war is the Schuldfrage, the question of guilt in Germany that you've been taught from the beginning. Are we responsible, or in any way do we need to feel guilty for the actions of our forefathers, for what horrendous acts they have done? Um, this is lingering in society. This is still up to debate, and there are clearly two oppositions. There are some that are trying, like the Red Army fraction, to kind of install a new regime, get rid of political agendas that are not kind of opening up to new, wider Germany, but others that are thinking that it was better back then, and it should be going back to that ideology. You have various student protest movements that start in the 68. That one of the most probably known for the beginning of kind of that confronting ideology is in 68. The transparent that has been raised during the initiation of the new rector in the Hamburg University, where it just read "Unter den Talaren der Muff von 1.000 Jahren." Under the suits of the university professors, there's still the mock of 1,000 years, referring to the 1,000-year Reich of Germany, meaning that nothing has changed in the academic and institutional system of Germany, but it's not being dealt with. People are not dealing with the question of how do we define our Germany now that we've went through post-war. People of the Nazi regime might be still in power, their ideology just suppressed, but they are still where they were. And so there's a lot of lingering hatred that is rising. And I think that is the core theme that you should take from the German autumn section and set it up early. Because the players will have in their life encountered neo-Nazis. They will have encountered punks. They will see the rise of punk and leftist movements. They will have seen the terror that goes through Germany from either sides. It is on everybody's mind. If the players come from a different country or so, and they just live in Germany, they would still experience this. If they walk down a street, they see, a group of clearly neo-Nazis accosting or accusing some immigrants on the street or something. It is horrific, and these things could be incorporated quite well to set up a later part of the campaign without making it awkward and just bring up suddenly, oh yeah, and there are Nazis around. It is, I feel like a bit distasteful and makes it weird element of like, oh, we're just adding Nazis now because they are there and they're part of the campaign. It is something that I feel like should be incorporated from the get-go. And I think that's we're not going to go now into the German autumn section. It's just one of the core principles is that there is a neo-Nazi association called the Germanische Gemeinschaft, who has been kind of becoming very powerful since the reunification. And they have become openly neo-Nazis. They declare that they dislike the current state. You have an idea of how their movement, how their organization is. But you also, as players, in a sense, are aware that there are a lot of hidden neo-Nazis, people that agree with their ideology, but they will not openly say that they are neo-Nazis or something. But this can lead to confrontation issues in players' backstories and their kind of upbringing. It is something very important to consider, even if you have no history of Germany or the time during that. But that should be the general takeaway. Germany is torn between ideologies, people who dislike the reunification under Kohl and how everything now is kind of changing in directions that they don't want to have. And it's important that this us versus them mentality within Germany is becoming like a powder keg. And there's no clear answer of how to address this. And unfortunately, political situation has not changed too much, one can say, that we see it still going on today, or again today. And yeah, that's, I think, one of the few points that I wanted to say to the German autumn. But Martin, do you have any idea, any comments on my ramblings here?
Yes, I can add a couple of, I guess, slightly different to the cultural perspective slightly differently. So for those of us who did not grow up in Germany, unfortunately, neo-Nazis exist all over the shop. So draw on your experience with running into these kinds of political movements, I suppose. Because of course in Sweden, for example, during the 1990s, there was also a huge neo-Nazi movement that was very open about what they were. And I am sure that inspired some of the writing as much as looking into the German situation. That would be my guess. Mm. I would also say one thing I'm fortunate to have it in my group that is playing now. One of us has a bit of a Germanophone context, which is also, of course, very valuable because I can hand out excerpts of things in German and leave the translation burden to other people. I just had to say Germanische Gemeinschaft, and you get a facial expression from this person that immediately communicates that they understand what kind of organization that is, and that immediately set a particular tone to that whole scene. The O. That's what we're going to be dealing with. But perhaps we could think of a couple of sort of ways. So how do we bring this theme in at the beginning? Because I guess there is a risk if you start with the Rathaus in Hamburg with the author's banquet, and if you don't address this until later, that it could be like you said, a sort of obscene change of tone in the campaign. Like, oh, here come the Nazis. So how do we establish this threat and this theme early?
Adding elements of these kind of things can be done, I think, in various ways. One of that I kind of came up today in research and kind of preparation was, for example, later on, Magda writes a book in 71 about the rise or reviving of neo-Nazism or Nazism in East Germany, and it's published, it's highly known. So might the player characters already know about this? Would she have talked to members of maybe Germanische Gemeinschaft in that, where she kind of has an informant and has kind of direct statements, giving you an early kind of connection? Oh yeah, I've read that name before. I've heard it in Magda's book, or she talked to me about it while I visited her. Um, you also might have characters that, for example, let's say, want to have weapons or have guns. If they're not an official capacity of law enforcement, having a weapon is, in general, very unlikely unless you are a hunter and have a specialized license for it. But often enough, there are enough people that still have their little box from grandfather somewhere in the corner, or they might have procured a gun somewhere in the black market. Now, that's a perfect little scene that you can add in the backstory with your characters, where uh, you just give them the description of when they want to procure a gun because of some other things that they might need to get a gun. Um, and they approach, they find somebody who gives them a contact, and that contact is in a back alley parking lot. And when you approach, you just see a shadow, but then you come to them, and they're just a normal, you know, German guy, um, but they're wearing maybe a mechanical uniform because they just come off work. And when they open the trunk, you see various kind of parts and automotive parts or mechanical parts lying around, and you can just on the brief kind of mention here, these parts, and there's a logo of this and that, or a withered logo on the sides. Doesn't have to be more than that. It's just like a side note. The main thing is they get the gun, and when they hand out the gun, you might see kind of on their forearm, like either 88 or GG, kind of tattooed on there. And you've established already a connection that the player might not understand. They understand when they see GG or like H 88, which refers to the eighth letter in the alphabet, which would be H, for the Heil Hitler salute of the neo-Nazis. That would be then the connection that they immediately draw. Oh, maybe. Do I really want that gun? Or, I mean, if I pay them, then where does the money go to? You already establish an uncomfortable feeling, and then later on, when they actually grab the gun, you're like, "Oh, remember where you got this from?" Um, it's little things that you can kind of invoke. Scenes on a subway, on their daily route to work, or if they live in a shared apartment or multiplex apartment building, you will have these interactions that if you grew up in a city, or even worse, on a small town in the middle of nowhere, you might know specifically from your own memory such occasions. Hopefully not too many, but um, if you have, draw from these ideas and add them in the generation of the characters in the first few steps. Give them the idea. Going to the Rathaus in Hamburg, how do they go? If they go by public transport, there might be people that are just, in their way or cause trouble. There's that's a easy integration that helps you establish a connection with Nazis and the underlying lingering conditions in Germany without later on to kind of make it seem awkward when suddenly there's a group of people approaching you, or the characters in this case. What do you think,
Yes.
Martin?
Yes. I think, and inspired by you, I have put in a few just relatively short little side scenes, both in Hamburg and in Berlin, where a character is out walking their dog in the night, and there is an interaction, or at least a potential for an interaction, with some skinheads who are vandalizing and writing a slogan on a wall. And there are also these in Berlin. We learn in the Germanische Gemeinschaft that they have a particular jacket that the members are wearing. So of course there are multiple groups of Nazis that are seen at different points when they move through Berlin. Also punks, of course, because we gotta set the scene with some house occupations and so on.
Exactly.
But we have Nazis with these particular jackets, and at some point there will be Germanische Gemeinschaft will show up again. But we'll see how long it takes, also, because before the group starts to investigate this trail more in detail. As we said before, we are relatively early, only at session 8 so far.
Well, thank you. And as you're maybe a bit early in the campaign, I think it's late for us for this recording. So I think for tonight and for this episode, we'll try to compress it here, and we'll rather go into detail about Session 0 and the Killer's Dance maybe in the next episode, and see where this takes us. I hope you enjoyed it and you took some inspiration from it, and we hope you join us again at the Guide to Black Madonna. Thank you very much, Martin. Where can people find you if they have further questions?
Thank you. The easiest places to find me and talk about cult-related things, probably the Cult Elysium Discord and the Illusion Horror Convention Discord. Lots of Discords. I am on there.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm David. You find me also on the Illusion Horror Con server, and also in the upcoming Illusion HorrorCon 2025, December 5th to 7th. If you are not heard of us, go to the illusionhorrorcon.events and you find all the information on there. Also, if you have any suggestions, ideas, and hopes to be discussed here, or have ideas yourself, feel free to send them to us and get in contact with us. And we'll try to get and address certain points and hope to help you run the Black Madonna even better. Thank you very much, and have a beautiful day.